Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Rachel Green. I'm the Chief Executive here at SANE Australia, and I'm really pleased to see how many people have registered and are already joining online to be with us tonight. I think we've had over 200 people sign up to join us for this conversation this evening. So thank you, welcome, and I hope we can provide some interesting discussion and insights for you today with our amazing guests. Before we kick off, I would just like to acknowledge that I'm on the Gadigal lands tonight and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us online and the lands on which my guests are joining us from as well. So just before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. We will try and save some time for Q&A at the end. You can ask questions through the chat, and so please do shoot them through as soon as they come to you, and we'll try and save some time. Any that we don't get to answer, we will ask our guests for their contributions and have some follow-up discussion on SANE forums, and we'll send an email out to everyone with links on how to get there and how to sign up. So a little bit about how this discussion came about. Here at SANE Australia, we've been around for about 40 years. As a lived experience-led organisation, our mission is to bridge the gaps in support and deliver digital stepped care and online recovery communities. And one of the really important ways we try and do that effectively for the community is by partnering with specialist organisations. So tonight, I'm very pleased to be joined by our partners at Phoenix Australia, the Centre for Posttraumatic Mental Health, and Disaster Relief Australia to bring you this conversation, which is obviously very timely given we are not far away from the final report into the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide, which we believe is being handed down on the 9th of September. So joining me online this evening is Enterprise Professor Nicole Sadler, the Director and CEO of Phoenix Australia, and Warwick Lugton, General Manager of Training and Capability at Disaster Relief Australia. So to get us going, I'm going to invite each of my wonderful guests to tell us a bit about themselves and their current role and share a bit of their background. Once again, if you've got questions, please do pop them in the chat so that we can pick them up at the end. Nicole, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us a bit about your role at Phoenix and the work you do?
Thanks, Rachel, and delighted to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So as you said, I'm the Director/CEO of Phoenix Australia, the Centre for Posttraumatic Mental Health. We're a not-for-profit which is affiliated with the University of Melbourne. And in fact, we were set up almost 30 years ago now by the Department of Veterans Affairs to look at how do you support veterans and their mental health. And over the years, that mission has just grown and grown. But veterans and military members and their families have continued to be very core to our mission throughout our entire time. And we do a lot of work in terms of with individuals, with communities, and with workplaces, and trying to look at how do you help to prepare them for when they might be having to deal with stuff which is tough. How do you recover from it? How do you support the individuals? How do you support their boss and their leadership? And how do you support those people who support them? And we do research and we do development of strategies and training programs and policies and procedures. So very much how do you take that research evidence and turn it into stuff that makes sense in terms of implementing it?
What an important role to be playing for the community in terms of, bringing that expert knowledge and translating it. But you're also a veteran yourself, Nicole. Can you tell me, how did your service shape who you are today?
Yes, I'm a veteran. So I am a psychologist, and I started my psychology career in the Army, and I spent 24 years in full-time service and had some wonderful experiences, and really have always enjoyed being able to work with people and try to make sure that they're getting the best out of their life, and being able to be challenged at work, but also being able to recover from things that are difficult. I am, in fact, the child of a Vietnam veteran. So military has always been a part of my life. And most recently, my son was in the military for 7 years. So I know what it's like to be in the military. I know what it's like to be part of a military family. Definitely being a military mum has been the most stressful role of all, but I think that military service, I've always been very community minded, and very much really interested in making sure, and we ask people to do difficult jobs, sometimes having to do things which are tough. How are we making sure that we're doing the right thing by them, and looking at how we support them and help them to keep resilient, but also how do we support them when things perhaps have gotten a bit tough, and what advice do we give to those people who love them and support them also?
Thanks so much for sharing that, Nicole. What a dynasty of veteran experience you come from. That question of support leads us nicely into a question for Warwick. Can you tell us a bit about your role at DRA? What do you do there? And for those who might not be familiar with the organisation, perhaps tell us a bit about what DRA offers. And we'd love to know, what does a typical day look like for you?
Wow, that's a whole bushel of questions there. Okay, so I'll start with DRA. So Disaster Relief Australia is a veteran-led disaster relief organisation that unites the skills of veterans and civilians within the community to support disaster-affected communities. And we've been around for the last 7 years, and founded by veterans, and have run operations. We're at around the 40 mark at the moment in Australian communities and also overseas. We started off as Team Rubicon Australia, which some of you might be familiar with, and then transitioned to Disaster Relief Australia. And yeah, we try and reignite hope in communities that have been affected by disaster. And it turns out that a great way to do that is to help them out in the recovery phase after that disaster. So after the emergency has finished, we come in after, when people are realizing what the impact has been, and we try and support them through that first part of the journey to establish their new normal. What I do there is I'm the General Manager of Training and Capability. So I, for the last 3 years, have built our sort of training paradigm. So we do lots of professional development. We have an RTO partner that we do nationally qualified training through. We have a number of internal courses that we run, and so there's an ecosystem of training that we have in order to help professional development of our members, support them performing roles within the organisation, and yeah, to be able to better affect the disaster affected community in ways that might be unsafe if you weren't trained. And so we try and make sure we cover off on all those grounds as well. And in capability, so we've got 12 different burgeoning capabilities, which we're trying to create structure and governance and volunteer and community, sort of the nexus of the interaction between those two. So the people that can do it, the people that need it, and then how do we facilitate that in the best way possible. Yeah, so that's two of those questions. Can you remind me what the third part was?
I love those principles, actually, Warwick, of reigniting hope, and also you were saying just now about creating community. Tell us, what does it look like for a veteran who becomes part of DRA and goes and participates? What sort of activities are they doing, and what do they bring to that environment that's unique?
Okay, so veterans, depending on their experience, so there is a very broad spectrum of veteran experience out there, but there is a standardization of training throughout the services, and I guess organizational expectations about conduct, and the application of skills and discipline and all these kinds of things, which are all really crucial in a post-disaster environment. And I guess the training that people received in defense is very translatable to that environment. And I guess the way that we sort of employ that is threefold. Okay, so in defense, you've got frontline troops, you've got support organizations, and then you've got, you know, services that might be back in Australia or in a completely dislocated area, and they all have their role in bringing about the mission. And so that sort of roughly translates to the three ways that you could be involved in DRA as a veteran volunteer. So one is on the front line. So we conceptually are sort of like a portal. So we'll take you from your home location and put you down with everything that you need in the disaster affected community. We'll organize the jobs, we'll organize vehicles, tools, all of that, and put you into a team. So a small team of 4 or 5 people, and we'll send you in the direction of the disaster affected person that day. And so we'll have a list of jobs and you can go out, and we usually run that for 7 days at a time. That's what we call a wave. And we run wave after wave after wave. So every wave hands over to the next one, so that it's a bite-sized piece of time that people could take leave for, or that if they just have available. But it's still significant enough to, one, bed in the structure of the organization to understand how we function. So it's not a quick in, drinking through the fire hose and then out. So there's days to consolidate. There's also days to consolidate relationships with the other people that you're working with. And for some people, most importantly, time to bed in relationships with the disaster affected community. For the people that really need that help, to hear their stories is quite profound. There's a number of jobs that I've done that I could think of off the top of my head right now that impacted me in the way that I show up in this organization every single day. When times get tough, I reflect back on their stories because they lost everything. And it's a good recalibration for life and how good it's going outside that environment. And so that's one way. Another way is you can do short-term operations in your local area if you couldn't deploy for 7 days at a time. Particularly good for younger people and younger veterans who have transitioned out of service and gone straight into another full-time job. Getting a week away is difficult, but we also run short-term operations in all of our DRT locations. So our DRTs are disaster relief teams. So we have a disaster relief team in every capital city, 2 in Queensland, so 1 in Townsville, 1 in Brisbane, and 2 in New South Wales, so Coffs Harbour and Sydney. So that's the 2 of those ways, and they're the operational ways. And then we have the stuff that's behind the scenes. So the people who are mobilizing our people to the operation, enrolling people in our membership system, all of those kind of things. So if you can't physically deploy, there's still a way that you can meaningfully utilize your skills to support our effects in the disaster affected community.
So thanks for that, Warren. It's really interesting. There's some themes coming through here about what that experience looks like. And I'm paraphrasing you here, but it sounds like there's that importance of that coming together with disaster affected communities and creating hope. There's also that sense of familiarity, and that some of the processes are kind of mirroring what people might have done when they were in service. It's also that validation aspect. And I imagine also probably there's a physicality to it. I have watched some really interesting DRA videos on your programs. There are a lot of chainsaws. And I imagine there's something to that. Nicole, can I throw to you? Maybe if we just chat a little about well-being for veterans. Are these themes that the evidence or your research show are valuable for veterans and either protecting or maintaining their well-being?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, look, veterans are just part of the broader community, aren't they? So these are things that are good for us in general. When we think about our mental health and well-being and connecting in with some of the things that Warwick has spoken about, first of all, we know it's really important to have a sense of meaning and purpose. Why am I doing this? What brings value to my life? And that doesn't have to be a paid job. Sometimes it is volunteering. It is about the connections and relationships that we have as well. We know that it's really important that we're thinking about our physical, our psychological, and our social health. All of those things that, we get told across our life that we should be looking after, that, everything in moderation. You have to look after your physical health. You have to think about your mental health and well-being. You have to be making sure that you're getting enough sleep and getting the right diet. All of those things are really fundamental to our mental health and well-being. And one of those really key ones are social interactions. What we don't want to see is people isolated. It's not about having a whole heap of different friends or lots and lots of people in your life. It's making sure that you have at least a few people that you can turn to and you can connect to and will have your back whenever you require some sort of support. That is really fundamental in terms of our mental health and well-being throughout our entire life. So, some of those things that Warwick has spoken about, they're really nice things that we all should be thinking about in terms terms of our mental health and wellbeing. And the nice thing about the type of work that they're doing in DRA is that it does replicate the things that people have been used to in their military career, and usually the reasons that they have joined the military. They like doing things as part of a team. They like doing things which are community minded. They like doing something which is bigger than just themselves, that they're helping out. They usually don't want to be sitting behind a desk. They want to be out there doing something practical. And at the end of the day, to be able to say, that's what I contributed to, that's how I made a difference. So I think there's lots of really nice examples of those things that can support mental health and wellbeing.
That's really
Can I just jump in there really quickly?
Yeah, please, Warwick.
So chainsaws tend to be something that gets pumped out in our social media and our videos and all this sort of stuff, and we do heaps of it. I just want to be clear about that. But there are lots of different ways that we support people on the ground. That just happens to be one that looks cool on film, I guess, for some people. But I just saw a question pop up in the chat there. You know, do you have clerical openings in DRA? Sorry, I didn't see the rest of that. I just saw the little snapshot. But yeah, we do. And sometimes the clerical or the membership roles are just as important as being able to go out and chainsaw on someone's property. And if you think about volunteering on a spectrum, and if you think about what Nicole just talked about with those different areas of life, so sleep's important, socializing, and making sure it's the right kind of socializing and these kind of things. I don't want to get too into any particular model, but there is a model of resilience being the shield, and there are multiple layers to that shield. And if we think about it in those terms, what volunteering within DRA can do is it can kind of be a choose your own adventure as to which areas of your shield or which layers of these positive psychological and also physical activities you can choose to be a part of, which is one of the ways that we, I guess, can address the needs of disaster affected communities in ways that across the spectrum that veterans and other members of the community are willing to offer those things. That's a bit of a ham-fisted way of explaining that, but basically you can pick which of the layers that you feel like you need to address, and there is a role within DRA for you to do that, which is a unique example. A lot of volunteering options are quite specific, whereas we have this kind of very broad snapshot of ways that you can get involved.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Warwick. And I can see already some great questions are coming through. We're going to try and either weave them in or answer them at the end, but please keep it going. I wanted to just touch on something that we were chatting about just before we started, that you also shared about how the special sort of resilience and experience that veterans bring to that disaster context, you know, it means that they're able to cope in ways that, you know, civilians might get more challenged by. And I love that, you know, that role of sort of leveraging that strength in this environment of a disaster in the Australian community to help people feel like they're validated and bringing that identity. Someone's asked a question in the chat there about transition, which actually is something we're really eager to talk about tonight. It's such a critical period for veterans, transition to civilian life. Nicole, what can you tell us about the experience of veterans?
So, you know, a veteran is one of those terms that can mean a lot of different things. In fact, in the Australian environment, anyone who's served at least one full day of continuous service it can be called a veteran. We often think about a veteran being as someone who's been off to war or has done many, many years of service. And in fact, that's not the case. And so veteran experiences can be incredibly diverse. And then that means that, you know, transitions are also incredibly diverse. And often we think about, you know, the things that must be stressful for veterans, or the things that perhaps they're concerned about would be things like what they saw on an operation or the type of training that they did. But sometimes the things which are stressful for people is the stuff that they didn't get to do during their career. It can be just as stressful if you joined and after a couple of months you blow your knee out and you have to be discharged. That's incredibly stressful for people as well. So, you know, when we think about who is a veteran and what does their transition look like, it's just a multitude of different experiences that we need to be thinking about. Transitions are difficult. Changes in our life are difficult. And the less control you feel like you have over it, and the less, if you, for example, have been transitioned when you didn't expect to be, or you didn't choose to be, that can be a lot more stressful for people. And the less prepared you are and the less control you have over something, the more difficult it can be for individuals and also for their families.
That issue of transition actually, being a period that's really important to navigate is actually consistent from our experience here at SANE across every sort of part of the community that we might support who are, looking to address trauma or looking to manage their wellbeing. Periods of transition can be times of great growth and learning, and they can also be times when you need extra support. Tell me, Nicole, before I move on to Warwick on this topic, what exists currently? What does the environment look like in terms of transition for veterans? What are we doing right now as a country?
Yeah, look, I think transition has been a topic that the military and Veterans Affairs and the general community has been talking about for many years now. And I think there's been an awareness that we could have been doing better, that we could do better and we need to do better. And one of the things that in research that we have seen about transitioning people from full-time military service is this really interesting finding that sort of two really interesting things. One is that people do much better if they are transitioning voluntarily. So there are higher risks for those people who are transitioning either because of a medical reason and or an administrative reason than those people who are getting to choose when they're transitioning. And that, in fact, is most people get to choose when they are transitioning. And the other thing that we see is that there's this delayed impact. Often people seem to be okay for maybe the first 12 months. I think sometimes they've got a bit of money behind them. Perhaps they're going off on a holiday. They're pretty excited to have a bit of freedom or doing a different type of lifestyle than perhaps they have been for several years. But what we see is that there can then be this deterioration in people's mental health and well-being from that 12 months, 24 months post having left full-time service. And of course, that's really difficult because often that's when services and supports are not as clearly obvious to people. If they've been out for a period of time, who do you turn to? You're obviously not part of the military anymore. They may or may not be connected in with Department of Veterans Affairs. They may or may not be connected in with ex-service organisations, and they might feel like this is something I should already be over. I've been out for 1 year, 2 years. Why is it now that I'm really struggling with this transition? So, this is part of the conversation which we're seeing across Australia is how do you have better support services? How do you have better integration from the time and the services that exist within Defence, then through to Veterans Affairs, through to all of these other community and ex-service support agencies? How do you have that for individuals? How do you have it for family members, regardless of how they've transitioned, including for people who have transitioned out of, when it wasn't their choice? And how do you make sure that those services are able to be there for years later, and being able to be responsive to the way that their needs might change throughout that time period?
Thanks. That's a lot of really rich and important information for us to be thinking about in terms of supporting transition. I imagine both for those sort of ESI organisations that specialise in this place, but also for organisations like SANE, delivering a sort of a mainstream national mental health support service. It's one of the things we're so interested in. Warwick, what's your perspective here? What does transition mean in terms of identity?
Okay, so I'll just give a bit of background on my military service, so what I say makes sense to people who have a frame of reference for that. So basically, I joined when I was 17. I had a couple of small-scale jobs before that. I was a reserve for the first couple of years, transferred to full-time as a medic, and then spent the next 10-ish years split between 6 years in Darwin at one CISB, so a medic in the health company in one brigade there, and then went to SASR and spent most of my time at SASR in 2 Squadron, so G Troop in 2 Squadron, if anyone's sort of that familiar. And that was a progressively increasing amount of my identity that went into the job. And we were on recovery. For those of you who know sort of what that is, it's a short notice deployment readiness that SASR stands up all the time. And usually you rotate through it for 6 months at a time. We happened to be on it at a transition period, and we ended up being on it for about 20 months. And so it's on a very short notice to move, and it's a very busy sort of operational and training environment. And so I literally came off that, and then 3 months later I discharged. And so I went from being at the most utilized and functional and highest amount of responsibility I'd had in the military to then going on yoga teacher training in Bali 2 weeks after I got out. And what I recognized, I guess, going through that experience was that what got me here won't get me there with my sort of transition to civilian life. And I didn't really know what that looked like, and I didn't have good terms to put around that. But I did recognize that there was an identity transition that I needed to go through because there had been some negative role modeling I'd seen of other people from that environment where they'd left, but they'd gone straight into another completely veteran oriented environment, and they were isolated from any sort of reintegration. Their cohort was the same people that they'd just been working with in the military. And in seeing that play out, I didn't think that was the right path for me. And it might have been great for various reasons for them, but like what I saw was not what I wanted to be involved in. That's why I went to Bali and did a teacher training for yoga, which is something I'd only done for a couple of months before I got out, and it just made my body feel better. So it was physical healing, I guess. And that was a really positive experience for me, but it also helped me on the road of, I think the term is identity renegotiation. So figuring out who I was going to be after I left my role in the military. And that took a long time. And I don't think it was until I found Disaster Relief Australia, and I was doing a job where I was values aligned, again, like I was in the military, being a medic, to what I was getting up and doing every day, that I feel like I effectively transitioned from that previous identity to what I am now. And I think because there is a very wide spectrum of veteran experience, everyone needs different inputs to that. I was fortunate, I guess, in some ways that I didn't have a partner. And so I was able to walk a bunch of that journey myself, and I wasn't having to perform a role for someone else. But not everyone has that scope. So you might have to renegotiate your identity and that partnership and other things at the same time, which means you do it a very different way to what I might have done. But I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you've got a partner, then it's going to look different. If it was a medical discharge or an administrative discharge versus one that you just decided your time with the military was done, that's going to look different as well. And so I think the key message that I try and impart with people, and I know that it's a bit ironic that a lot of the people on this call will have already done their transition, but hopefully someone will see this at some point who's still serving and realize that identity renegotiation is your friend. You need to start doing it early and figure out what is going to be viable for that pathway for yourself, in no longer being a gun number, an infantryman, a combat systems specialist on a Navy ship. Sorry, I'm Army, so forgive me. Our roles are not going to be awesome, right?
You're doing better than me, Warwick. I wouldn't get very far trying to throw some roles.
Yeah, but whatever that looks like for you, especially in the military, where it's every support service sort of comes to you through the lens of the military. And I guess that is it's one of the roles, like emergency services, where you tend to identify with the job that you do as part of your identity, or a large part of your identity, and preparing for that transition away from whatever your previous role was and what you are becoming, and a bunch of the stuff around that being okay. And you can be really proud. Like, the proudest I've ever been was being a kilo, so a special forces medic, an unqualified person in a special forces troop at SASR. But that doesn't mean that I need to cling to that. I still had that experience, but that doesn't need to be my identity in where I am now. And I'm really proud, and I get to get up every day, and I get to help people, and I get to go to sleep at night knowing that that's what I do and get up every day tomorrow. It's not that I'm not proud of that. I am really proud of that, but I feel like I was doing something that I needed to from why I joined the military originally in that early part of my life, and that topped out at being that medic and having those experiences of deploying to Afghanistan and stuff like that, and realizing that that actually was not really that important for my identity. It was just something I was really proud of, but it enabled me to switch away from that and transition to where I am now. And I'm really happy with that process, and I'm glad that I had experiences which triggered me to actually do that reevaluation in real time and chase experiences down where I could go through that identity shift. Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing that with us, Warwick. It actually reminds me a little bit about how identity can grow in other contexts as well. We often hear that where people have, been through intense period of grief, that you just grow and grow around it, and it doesn't go away, but it becomes part of you. But other things are also possible in future. I just wanted to touch on, you mentioned in sharing that with us, you joined up at 17. 17 is still quite a tender age to be navigating the world, and my understanding of the systems and supports in defence is they're incredibly effective at, as you say, getting everything to you. So I'm going to ask this question actually first to Nicole, then I'm going to come back to you, Warwick. What's the gear change like from being in an environment where everything's essentially coming to you and very organised and efficient and well delivered, colour-coded even, to being a civilian and dealing with the mental health system at large?
Oh, Rachel, so you've obviously never served in the military if you think that everything is always, really organized if you're in the military. Look, that point where many of us joined the military when we were young and we grew up in the military. We took on those values. It's very much a sense of our self-identity. A lot of the things that we thrive under, the structure, the idea of, being challenged, but also being guided in terms of what it is that we're doing, a nice hierarchy, who's in charge, who's making the decisions, and those sorts of things can really provide some good structure for us. And in fact, as humans, we often really thrive under those conditions. We have a sense of meaning and purpose. We know where we need to be. We know what we should be doing. That could be really good for us in terms of our mental health and well-being. Not always, but for many people it can be. And then transitioning out of those roles and having to negotiate some of those things can be really difficult for people. We spend a lot of time thinking about how the military is different from the civilian world, but you take those skills, you take those things that you've learnt within the military, you take those, and I think that some of the trick is working out how do you apply those to different ways within a civilian community. We're also still part of a civilian community. We all started off as in a civilian community to start off with, and often many of us are in partnerships, we have families, so we sort of navigate being in the military, but also then, having people in our family who are still civilians as part of that also. But it does take a period of time, and I think that that's why the transition journey can be quite a long one for people. You don't know what you don't know is going to be difficult for you, and some of the things that you think are going to be easy and not going to be difficult for you, you don't know until you get there. And even when you do have a plan, and even when you do have a job to go to, and even when you're the one who's choosing to leave the military, sometimes those changes and those transitions are more difficult than you think that they're going to be. And it is generally much harder when you didn't want to be leaving at that time, and you're having to make those transitions, and you're having to find a new identity at a time when this is not when you wanted to be doing it. And for some people, and I can see it, people talking about it in the chat, not only are they transitioning at a time that they're not choosing to, they're not the same person that's leaving the military who joined. They may be impacted physically, psychologically, socially, and often a combination of all of those things. So it's not just that you have to find a new identity, you have to find it in a way where perhaps you're not functioning in the way that you'd like to be. Perhaps your quality of life is not the same as it was when you started. So, those things are really challenging for individuals, and trying to find new meaning and purpose and roles and support networks and things to give you meaning are really challenging for individuals in those circumstances.
Nicole, I just want to follow up on that before I come to Warwick on this question. We've talked already quite a bit about identity and all the positives that come from that. But again, sort of responding to something that's coming up in the chat, for people who have felt they haven't been supported or have felt like an outlier, I can imagine that might feel sort of doubly challenging, because if everyone else is feeling very part of a team and connected, what is it, is that an extra risk factor for people who've either experienced that kind of conflict or feeling on the outside while they're in the military, and then perhaps also for those who leave and have a bad experience trying to get help and trying to get support? What does that tell us? What should we be taking from that about what's needed to get wellbeing back on track, or what to look out for?
Yeah, look, it's a really good point, Rachel, and I think that it is a risk factor and a vulnerability for people if they feel like they're, for one, if they feel like they were let down, whether it was by Defence, by Veterans Affairs, or perhaps by both of those organisations. Particularly if you feel like, I've been damaged and my service was to blame for that. I went in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and that's not how I'm leaving. That can be really difficult for individuals and for their families, for those people who love them, and then trying to make sense of that, and trying to find new purpose, and I guess to almost make peace with perhaps what your military service has looked like can be really challenging for individuals, and then sometimes, particularly if they don't feel like they fit that veteran mold. And it might be because they left under difficult circumstances, that they were discharged because of something that they did, or they left after a short period of time, or they never got to deploy. They might look at some ex-serving organisations and go, oh, but I don't fit that mold. I don't feel like I fit into that. And, when you're just trying to find connection and you're trying to find a group of people to support you, if you don't feel like you fit that mold, or you feel like you're not supported by them, that can be incredibly difficult too. So I guess, one of the things to be mindful of is that getting connection and purpose and finding your team of people might look incredibly different from a military model. DRA will be a great fit for some people, but not for everyone. And so be willing to find different types of groups, to find your tribe, to find the people who can support you, and that it has to be an experience which is making you feel better. And for some people, that will be connected still in with the same group of people that you served with, or similar groups of people. But for other people, it will look completely different. That you need to be finding different types of activities and different groups to really feel like you have a good connection and that you're feeling well supported.
Thanks. Warwick, I'll come to you now. So the question at hand here is about, having transitioned from the military to civilian life and trying to navigate systems, services and supports. Can you tell us, what your understanding is of the sort of what works well, or what the barriers might be, especially as Nicole's just said, what someone actually benefits from might look quite different from veteran to veteran?
That's sort of a difficult question, because I feel like looking at some of the comments that people have put in the chat, there's quite a wide gamut of times that people left the military, and I feel that has a big impact on, especially progressively over time. I feel that there's more and more services, more and more ESOs providing those sort of niche opportunities for transition and identity sort of recalibration and a bunch of these other things, and finding your tribe. It might be sea kayaking group. It's very, very diverse. What I do think is that now is the best time ever to be transitioning out of defence. All right, I've seen so much effort in so many exemplary people working to improve this space since I've been with DRA and sort of since I discharged myself. And that was only in 2016. And I would say that what I've seen, the supports that are available, the way that they're being integrated with defence, with things like the Joint Transition Authority, with the ESOs that we're sort of either in partnership with or that we have some sort of association with at DRA, or just like Phoenix. So the reason that DRA found Phoenix, I guess, outside your old CEO and Jeff, our original CEO's relationship was Phoenix were running a bunch of training for emergency service workers in psychological first aid and trauma-informed care. And that was for the established emergency services. However, at the time, it was being underutilized. And I just reached out and asked a question and said, could our volunteers be involved? We're working in a fairly adjacent field, and we've got people champing at the bit because they want to improve their mental health literacy. And finding, particularly the majority of people who've done that training are actually retirement age and predominantly veterans who are looking to understand better, I guess, their own experience and how it could have been done better. And they're building that into the culture of our organization now. And I'll give you one example of this specifically. So there is an ESO roundtable, or ESORT, it's being called over here in 13 Brigade. And the Brigade Commander Brett Challoner established it. And it was basically to bring all the ESOs together and figure out what they're all doing and cross-load information between them, so that at the point that someone is leaving defence, and this was specific to 13 Brigade, this is not a all of defence initiative, but the ESORT basically, and it was run on base as well, and they had career expos and these kind of things in order to support it for especially the employment part of transition. But that cross-loading of information between the ESOs and making sure that if someone came to your organisation and said, hey, I want to be involved in something, but I'm not sure DRA is it, I could say, oh, well, what are your interests? And they would say, oh, sailing. And I'd be like, oh, well, Sailing On is, down at the South Perth Harbour. They meet every fortnight, I think, or every weekend. And I can give you the email address of the person that's, does the sign-ups and can organise all the activities, right? And then you are much more able to pass people to the area that they want to go. And when I got out, none of these very few of these organizations existed, and even fewer of them I was interested to engage with at all, because there was a lot of unknowns, and I didn't know whether that was the right kind of organization for what I was looking for or the support I needed at the time. And so I was a very hands-off. I was like, I'll make it on my own, I'll deal with it myself, and I won't engage with those services. But I feel like the accessibility of them now is improved a lot. It is far from perfect, but there are really great models that are making solid traction towards finding your tribe, finding the thing that fits for you, whether that's a support service, whether that's just some way to be active, whether that's volunteering with DRA in whatever capacity that might look like. There are just a lot of really good options available now, and I would encourage everyone to advocate to others about those options that you know about.
That's really great to hear, Warwick, actually, that over the years the sort of organising systems and information about how to find and navigate those specialist ESOs, even at the local level, sounds like it's greatly improved. Nicole and I spend a little bit of time talking about navigating for help, and I can see a comment in the chat about how, for some people, the ESOs might not be compatible with full-time work. And I think we've already sort of touched on quite a bit over this discussion about how, sometimes, people might not feel welcome as part of an ESO, especially if, as, some of the people have been commenting, if they were, discharged when they didn't want to be. Nicole, I'm going to throw this one to you. What's the current state for help seekers generally in trying to find help? If they're a veteran, how effective is it to find out what might be available? How easy is it? And whether a mainstream service that's not a specialist ESO might actually understand the context for a veteran?
Oh, it's a great question, Rachel. And I think that many of the people who are joining us today would have had the experience where First of all, it's really hard to ask for help. As human beings, mostly what we'd like to have happen is problems just go away, that they'll resolve themselves, and that you don't have to go and ask someone else for help. And often when we get to the stage where we really do need to ask for help, often we're feeling pretty desperate, and we're not necessarily in the best space to be trying to find that help. And then what can be incredibly frustrating if you get to services and you feel like they don't understand who you are or what your background is, and they're asking the wrong questions, or they're not taking into account what it would have been like in the military and perhaps what it was that you were exposed to. So we know it is incredibly important that people are able to easily find that information, what the services are that are available, and then also be connected in with people who can provide services in a way that is culturally competent and that they're confident. They know how to ask questions. They're not afraid of you being a veteran. Sometimes veterans can have, a bad reputation in terms of, they'll just be defensive and angry, and they'll be hard to work with, etc. So, Phoenix Australia does a lot of work in terms of, over the years, working with clinicians and peer workers, for example, around trying to provide some services and training to be making sure that we're providing not just the right evidence-based treatments, but also to doing it in a way which is culturally competent and also confident in the way that you're doing that. And you can go onto different websites and find out what services are available. One of the realities, unfortunately, in Australia at the moment, and in fact globally, is that there just aren't enough clinicians around. It can be hard to get into clinical services. Sometimes there can be waiting lists. Sometimes you're referred to someone that you don't connect with. So we do know that whilst it can be really important and critical for some people that they get into evidence-based treatment, all those other things that people can also do to get support is also vitally important. So whether or not it is those type of support that you might get more informally from your friends and families, from ex-service organisations, from what you might get out of places like SANE and forums and online support, all of those layers of support are incredibly important for us. So informal as well as formal support.
Thanks, Nicole. And for those who are joining us online, SANE, along with Phoenix and about 15 other mental health organisations from around the country, actually working on the general challenge of navigating to find mental health services and design better digital solutions. If you visit sane.org/digital-nav, you can register for updates and also tell us what you think about the mainstream environment and, being able to find the help you need or not, and any thoughts you might have on that important aspect of being culturally safe and competent to work with veterans. I think that's such an important call to action for us here at SANE and for every other mental health organisation. Just building off that discussion around competency and that sort of cultural safety, I want to ask you, Warwick, what is the role of stigma in help seeking? Does it affect veterans in terms of the sort of perception or understanding, or whether it might influence their likelihood of going and seeking help? Are there common misconceptions? Are there things people might be worried about?
Yeah, so I've definitely experienced versions of that, and plenty of my friends who are veterans have experienced similar, but there's, I guess, a few variations of the stigma, or perhaps just different stigmas in general. So one of the ones that has come up a lot in the experiences that I have is the assumption that because I'm a veteran, there is, like, I am damaged in some way, right? And for a feeling of empowerment, there's nothing worse than the assumption that you are in some way damaged or what have you. And when people will bring that up in the first sort of instance of communication with you, that's really on the tip of the tongue. That's not something that I experienced 4 or 5 meetings in. This was regularly as one of the first topics that would come up in conversation, or I would explain in a certain context where it was relevant for credibility. Hey, I went to Afghanistan, I did 2 trips with the Special Operations Task Group there, and people would be like, oh, you must have seen a bunch of stuff. Are you okay? Are you dealing with life all right? These kinds of questions that lead to you know, it's a negative that you've had those experiences. Now, everyone has different experiences, but I actually credit those with being one of the most positive sort of sets of experiences that I had, and I'm fortunate to do so. But yeah, there definitely is stigma and variations of that, and also just in the seeking of mental health support, there's a lot of different camps that have a lot of different opinions on that, and some within the veteran community itself, not just externally. And those stigmas, if it doesn't help you make your life better, then it's obviously not something we want to encourage, but for lots of different reasons. And it is getting better. Like, I'm trying to put a positive kind of lens to all of this, because I do see examples of this getting better a lot. But those stigmas still exist, and it just depends on who you're talking to and when and in what environment. Often the stance that people will take on those things, they might collectively agree generally that seeking help for for support for mental health is a good idea, and that's totally fine. There's no stigma associated with that. But if you said to them one-on-one, I need to go to insert mental health provider here, to get some help, they might have a very different reaction to you one-on-one. And it's those kind of things that mental health literacy and doing courses, exactly like the ones that we've encouraged in our organisation through Phoenix and Mental Health First Aid Australia and these kind of organisations, to dispel some of that with knowledge is one positive way you can do that. Peer support, being able to chat to people and find out online in a forum exactly like what SANE has developed, is another great way. Doing it in person with people who have done some sort of mental health literacy training on a DRA operation, or at your local, insert club here, bowling, whatever it might be, sailing, is important. So bringing that literacy up in the community, that is the peer support network that is going to normalize the things that do have stigmas associated with it, so that when you do bring that up, Rachel said a bunch of times in previous conversations, when you talk to someone, it needs to be the right person at the right time in the right environment. And so finding the environments that have the right people in it is going to net you a bunch more opportunities for the right time to have those kinds of conversations. And so from that perspective, that peer support element is incredibly important, because it's the people you talk to that you'll usually will form your opinions based on. It's not necessarily a news headline or something like that. You can disassociate that, whereas the people around you are likely to have a profound impact depending on how they react to what you say. So yeah, there are stigmas, and they are, some of them, breaking down over time, but also, there's positive role modeling and things like that. So the reason that DRA, one of the foundations of DRA, is to show that veterans are a powerful force for good in the community, right? So John Monash tried to demonstrate this, built the Great Ocean Road. There's a lot of examples of veterans having a positive impact in the civic community or after disasters and these kind of things. And that is also important for stigma, like role modeling the positive behaviors and, I guess, the fruits of the defense training and, the positive examples of that culture, where you can apply them to a new situation. What that does is the people who are applying those skills or that experience to that disaster affected community or whatever it might be, whilst role modeling to others that there is skill and power and good in the capacity and the background that you come from. For yourself, you actually get to reframe the experience, especially if you had a negative experience in the military of, that time was bad for me, I didn't enjoy it, and I look upon it, in a negative light. It's that background actually gave me a bunch of skills now that I'm using to align with my values to support disaster affected communities. And so there's a positive reframing of that experience in there as well. And so internal stigmas that people might have, that positive sort of retroactive reframing of their defense experience potentially is a massive positive, and just role modeling that to other people out there in the community of And it doesn't have to be with DRI. It can be with any number of organisations that do good for the community. Demonstrating that to others also gives them a degree of license to move in that direction as well. So yeah, I think there's a bunch of good stuff in that space, but we do need to be aware of it and actively trying to improve that those many different stigmas that are out there.
Thanks so much for sharing that with us, Warwick. Nicole, Warwick touched on this a little, and I wondered if you would expand and add your thoughts in terms of the potential of connecting and in that right context, the role of peer-to-peer support in helping people overcome maybe that stigma or concern about seeking help. For those who are joining us on the webinar who are not familiar with what SANE offers, we have developed within our recovery community at saneforums.org, we developed and we are currently testing a dedicated sub-community for veterans. It's only in its early design stages, and I'll post the link in a moment. We'd invite anyone to join who's here with us tonight. But Nicole, what's the potential of these kinds of anonymous peer-to-peer support services?
Yeah, look, they have a lot of potential. They, when we think about the things that assist people, that there's a few things that really help. First of all, and Warwick just touched on it, we know that it's good to talk through things which are difficult for us, to talk through our concerns, to talk through things that we're experienced. But the most important part of that is it has to be with the people that you choose at the time that you choose and that you have control over it. And forums can assist people to do this. You can do it in an anonymous way. So sometimes people are really happy to openly share their experiences. For other people, that is too confronting. And also the thing that we know is that often when people really need to talk to people, it's not at a convenient time, for a clinician or for family members. Sometimes it's late at night or in the middle of the night or when you can't sleep. Being able to log on and access a community that understands, a community that you can feel connected to can be really helpful. Of course, we put in all those normal safeguards around, this should be somewhere where it is a safe space to share, and that that people can feel like that they can share without being judged and all of those sorts of things. But, that really this not having to explain yourself, but to be able to connect in with other people who may not have had exactly the same experiences, but generally understand the types of things that you may have been through, can be incredibly supportive for people. So, this is just one thing. We sort of think about it as a whole ecosystem of things that you should be doing to support yourself. You can do stuff online. You should be doing stuff with family and friends and people who can support you face to face. You should be thinking about, how you look after your mental health and well-being. But certainly forums and this informal way of having peer support can be a really important pillar of that type of having support and understanding, and just having a safe space in which to talk to other people.
Thanks, Nicole. We're almost at time, and we've been doing our best to sort of weave the questions into the conversation as we've been going along. And so just a reminder to everyone, I've popped the link in the chat, but saneforums.org, if you jump on that profile, you can create an anonymous username and keep the discussion going with the 20 or so members that are already in there in that sub-community. But just before we wrap up, maybe some brief closing comments. Warwick, what would you want to share with people who maybe have been having a difficult time? How do we, what's one thing they could do to take a step forward in their healing?
That's a really difficult question, given the kind of healing that they're trying to do and at what stage they're ready to engage. Yeah, it's very dependent on the person. So for me, I wouldn't characterize myself as in need of a lot of healing. However, to improve my resilience, I find it's incredibly beneficial to find other examples of people who are doing it really tough and trying to find out what it is that they're holding on to, what is it at the core of them that gives them strength when literally the walls have fallen down around them, where their house is burnt down or whatever. And quite often the benefit you get is not some sort of philosophical answer. It's, you know, well, I just take care of my dog and, you know, do what I can, you know, day after day, find the next task, cross that off the list, and, you know, try and work through and process what's going on. And in seeing the resilience of others, it allows me to bolster it for myself and understand that, you know, my life is actually pretty good no matter what dramas I feel like are going on, that there are other people out there that are exemplars of doing it really tough and doing it and shouldering that burden pretty squarely. And so volunteering in that sense has been pretty helpful for me. But and so, like, as a DRA employee, it might seem strange that I'm saying I volunteer, but so we get 2 weeks of volunteer leave per year. But, you know, prior to any of those kind of arrangements, I've deployed quite a lot with DRA. And I guess and I'll continue to do that. And behind the scenes, I volunteer a couple of hours every day just because there's a lot of work to be done. But no, I think it's dependent on the person. And so going to the RSL might be great for some people if they're just looking for other people in a like-minded environment. But for a lot of people, the value proposition needs to be different for them to want to engage. So they might want an activity-based organization. So they might be just going for bike rides or running or surfing or something like that. And there's a bunch of those organizations around now. And so I think the first step is just to try a few things and be honest with yourself about, did I enjoy this or did I not? And can I characterize that, or can I break that down a little bit further and say, what did I like about this and what didn't I like about it? And that can help refine the choices about the things that you're going to try and get involved in. So even a peer support forum is like a very low risk start to that journey. Okay, what topics were we talking about? Did I like it? Did I not like it? Are there other people on there that can guide me to what another activity that they're involved with that they find value in? Okay. And then you progressively increase the amount of, I guess, vulnerability in the things that you're trying to do. And at the same time, figuring out what do I like about it? What do I not like about it? And using that to inform the choices of the next things that you do. And just, yeah, finding your tribe. And once you find it, realize that it's not all going to be smooth sailing. You're not going to get everything you want in every iteration of whatever kind of activity that you're doing, right? There'll be ups and downs, just like there's ups and downs in all the rest of life. And finding the value proposition that is worth riding the peaks and troughs is not always easy to do. But once you've found it, you know, as long as it's not doing harm, stick with it and take the benefits that it offers. But don't stop doing new things as well. Like, always keep testing the waters to find out if there's other things that you can be involved in. Because I feel like the isolationist mentality is a very easy one to creep in, and the exploratory, I guess, drive is a very quick one to deny. And so trying to explore more, be isolationist less is a good thing. Am I shying away from activities, and is that healthy for me, or am I exploring and trying to find things that are relevant? And do I recognize that there might be ups and downs along that journey, but I can deal with that as long as I've got support mechanisms in place? I guess for such a broad question, that's about as good as I can answer it.
That was
Nicole, please.
You weren't sure where you were going to go there, but you gave me about 50 answers there, and I think there was so much that you touched on there. You know, being open to, it might look different for everyone, and just taking those small steps, and you know, sometimes just ticking off a little task can be valuable, and opening up to others and getting the context right. And that role of just peer-to-peer support, it's actually been lovely to watch everyone in the comments supporting each other as they've been sharing their stories. And it's exactly the kind of thing that we see being really valuable for people on the forums. Nicole, last question to you. Any sort of closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think you mentioned right at the beginning that we will see the outcomes of the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide coming out next week. And I think it's going to be a pretty difficult time for this community. And I think that there will be a lot of criticism around things that we should have done better, that defence should have done better, that DVA should have done better and could do better. And I think that it's just really important to remember that there are services, there are support, there's absolutely things that need to be improved, and there's opportunities to do that. But you know, if it is stirring up things for people, you know, reach out to those services, check in on each other. You know, the general golden rule I have is, if something's changed in the way that you're thinking, feeling, or acting, and it's really impacting your ability to function or have quality of life, you need to do something different. Reach out to someone different, talk to someone different, get support from those people who know you, and you know, GPs, you know, different ESOs that might be available to you, your own support networks. There's plenty of places that, and forums like the one that SANE is setting up, there's plenty of places that you can go to and talk through and look for advice and support.
Thanks so much, Nicole. And thank you again to both of you, to Nicole from Phoenix Centre and Warwick from DRA, and to the 100 or so people who've been with us online for the past hour. It's been wonderful having your questions and comments coming through. And just a reminder, saneforums.org. If you'd like to keep the discussion going, go to saneforums.org, create an anonymous username and a profile, and you can jump on into the Veterans discussion forum and keep going for as long as you like, because much like Warwick's comment, we like to say we're people like you, and we offer 24/7 online support forums that are moderated and supported by our amazing community builders, one of whom, Jinx, you'll see over there on the forum, has been with us tonight. We'd love to have you all join us and help contribute to the design thinking that's going on over there. Thanks again. Lastly, SANE has a feedback form on our website, or you can email feedback@sane.org. I'd love to know what you thought of this session, ideas for future sessions, events or groups that might be valuable to the combined communities of veterans and their families. Thanks again, everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you all.